We go now to our panel of eggheads. R.J. Prestrito in Dallas. He is the author of Woodrow Wilson and the Roots of Modern Liberalism and American Progressivism. Burton Folsom Jr., he's the author of New Deal, Raw Deal, and Larry Schweikart. He is the author of A Patriot's History of the United States. All right. Where do I even begin? Who wants to give me, R.J., let me start with you, because your book really opened my eyes, on Woodrow Wilson. So let me go to you. Give me a definition of what a progressive really is.
Well, Glenn, to me, progressivism is all about moving beyond the Constitution, getting beyond the bedrock principles of the American founding. The progressives detested the political ideas behind the Declaration of Independence because they enshrined the idea of individual God-given rights as the end of government. They detested the Constitution because the Constitution put limits on the national government, which were designed to uphold those rights. And as you said in your introduction, the progressive dream was one of unlimited national government. Redistribution of wealth was part of that plan. And the progressives knew that the political principles of our founders stood in their way. So progressivism, in a nutshell, is to progress or to move beyond the Constitution.
You guys both agree with that here?
It is. I think it's even more in that there's an assumption about human nature that's built into progressivism.
Okay, let's get into that in a second, because I know where you're going, and I can't wait to open that can of worms. But let me go here. Most people, when you say the kinds of things, when I started learning about progressivism,
right,
really learning about it, I thought, well, now wait a minute, this is Marxism. But they separate, and help me out. If I would define the difference in their heads, it's the difference of revolution of Marxism and evolution of progressivism. Agree?
I think Marxism has an inherent mechanistic quality. This is going to happen regardless of who's in there making it happen. The progressives believe that individuals have a role in making this happen, and they're going to bring it about. So Woodrow Wilson is going to bring about this change.
Okay.
Glenn,
go ahead.
I like to think of the progressives as conservative socialists. The same aims, the same understanding of the role of the state, no boundary that individual rights can place between the state and the individual, but the change they want it to take place, as you said, more gradually, more organically. So okay, conservative socialists is not a bad way to think of it.
All right, and this is, because I want to make sure, because most Americans don't really have a handle on what the progressive movement is. And this is not about the Democrats. This is about the Democrats and the Republicans, right?
Sure. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive. Woodrow Wilson was a progressive. Progressivism had strong influence in both parties in the early 1900s, hence the progressive income tax. The whole idea that we can solve problems with government solutions, which means that we have to move beyond the Constitution.
All right. So, Larry, if you're an originalist, if you're somebody who says, I believe in the Constitution, I believe in what the founders did, I believe in the American experience,
right,
or the experiment, can progressivism and original intent republicanism, if you will, can they survive?
No, they cannot coexist, because the concept of the progressives is that man is perfectible. We can make man here and now, not in heaven, not in some afterlife, but we can make man and society perfect today, and as a result, everything they do works toward that end. The founders all thought, man is flawed. We're flawed. Not one of the founders would have thought he was perfectible in this life, and they put in institutional safeguards.
So, okay, so hang on just a second, because this is where America, I think this is what you really have to understand. What Larry is saying here is critical to understand, because there are no safeguards. This is why progressivism or Marxism always goes bad, because you can't perfect man, so it has to become more and more brutal. And men are flawed as well, who are running it, and sometimes their ego takes control. Can we flip this? Can we flip this chalkboard? Because Thomas Jefferson talked about this very thing, and the difference, I think this would be a fundamental difference here. The two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie the second down with the chains of the Constitution so the second will not become the legalized version of the first. That's the founders saying, you're never going to be able to perfect people. It's always going to be this way.
If you give somebody too much power, eventually that power will corrupt that person and ultimately the nation. You have to have a separation of powers according to the founders. Wilson wanted a centralization of power because you have to centralize power in order to accomplish government programs to redistribute the wealth and improve society along the direction the progressives wanted.
Okay, so when you hear the President of the United States talk about progressivism, and then he says, I want to fundamentally transform America. I'm going to ask each of you. Larry, I'm going to start with you. What does that say to you? What does that mean to you? What is the visceral or intellectual reaction either way?
Well, my skin crawls because it means the Constitution isn't good enough. What we have protecting our country today is not my vision of the country, and I have to get away from whatever we have today. It's dangerous and just really radical. It's the most radical thing any president has ever said.
Burton?
Well, it's the same thing because it means that we're not going to have rule of law. We're going to have rule by men, an educated elite of men. Power will be transferred to these people, and we will be governed by a small elite.
This is the czars. This is the, this company gets a bailout, but this company doesn't.
That's correct.
Right? Okay.
Exactly.
And RJ, what does it mean to you?
Well, Glenn, liberals have realized that the word liberal is a dirty word in American politics. It has been since the political debate in the 1980s. They've latched onto this idea of progressives because it sounds like a nicer word, but it also accurately reflects their view of the state.
All right. But RJ, isn't it true that progressive was a hot word? Liberal meant something entirely different around the turn of the century here in America. It meant maximum amount of freedom. It meant small government. It was more of a libertarian kind of idea. And then the progressives came in. They permeated both parties. It became popular until America saw what it was. And then it kind of really had to, it kind of had to shed the, well, people aren't really digging this. And they kind of had to go underground into the liberal thing. Then they destroyed the word liberal because it meant progressive. And then they dusted the word off progressive again and said, no, we have the answer. It's progress. Isn't this have we gone full circle here?
The term liberalism was hijacked from our founders, from the founding generation. Maybe the clearest progressive on this, Glenn, is the progressive philosopher John Dewey, who was a very influential figure in the early part of the 20th century. And he hijacked the term liberalism for the progressives. He said, well, there's the old liberalism. That's the liberalism of the Declaration of Independence, where it's about the liberty of the individual.
Two places here when we come back. I want to show you, America, how they have changed our history books and why they did that. And it goes back again to the Founding Fathers. They had to disconnect us from our Founding Fathers and the roots. And how they did that in the court system as well around 1920 and why they did that coming up in just